There's more encouraging news this morning on Australia's efforts to limit the spread of coronavirus. New South Wales has reported just 2 new cases for yesterday, and they did 4,400 tests in New South Wales as well, so there was a fair few tests done. It's the lowest number of new cases recorded in the state since March the 8th. Queensland reported 3 new cases for yesterday, and we'll hear from Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews in about 30 minutes on the situation in Victoria. But yeah, some really encouraging signs about how the spread of this coronavirus is relatively limited here in Australia compared to other countries around the world. And so here are today's key developments with our coronavirus coverage. So more than 1 million people have downloaded this government coronavirus tracing app since it was launched late yesterday. The government's hoping at least 40% of the population, or 10 million people, will download the app to speed up contact tracing of virus cases, but some people still have some privacy concerns with that. Restrictions have been eased in WA to allow indoor and outdoor gatherings of up to 10 people. Queenslanders will have more freedom to move around from Saturday. Picnics among households will be allowed, as well as non-essential shopping. And the Northern Territory will reopen parks for fishing, camping and recreation in the coming days. Overseas, and Spain has recorded its lowest number of coronavirus deaths in over a month. 288 deaths were confirmed in the past 24 hours, and it's terrible those people have died, but that is comparatively low compared to the carnage that we have seen in Spain. More than 23,000 people dead there. The US is approaching 1 million infections as the death toll there exceeds 54,000. Although deaths and hospital admissions are falling in New York, the national infection rate rose again pretty dramatically at the end of last week. And in Iran, mosques are beginning to reopen in parts of the country which have been consistently free of the virus. The nation will be divided up into 3 regions based on the number of infections. Okay, so let's take a look at some of those elements in detail now. The Queensland Government has announced new fines for attacks on frontline workers. They've also announced an easing of some restrictions from midnight on Friday. Reporter Stephanie Zillman joins us now. So, Steph, what are the key restrictions that will be eased?
Well, Joe, this is the first time now that Queenslanders are free to leave their home just for recreation. So it means that in your family group, or if you're a single, you can take a friend to have a picnic, for example. You can drive up to 50 kilometres from your home. So that, unfortunately, for people in Brisbane, excludes beaches, popular beaches like the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast. But 50 kilometres is still a substantial easing of that restriction. Also, national parks are open now for recreation, not campgrounds though, so you can't go and spend the night at a national park, but significant easing of restrictions there, including you can go shopping for non-essential items. So it might also spell the return of some clothes shops, for example, reopening.
And tell us about the new fines for deliberate coughing and spitting.
Yeah, so this was quite disturbing. The Premier this morning telling us that there's been a steep rise in attacks on essential workers with, coughing, spitting and deliberately sneezing, not just on frontline health workers, but also on retail workers in shops, for example. Just a huge increase really in those terrible attacks. So they've introduced new fines to try and curb that. There'll be an on-the-spot fine now of $1,300 for anyone who spits, coughs or sneezes on another person. Also, if it gets to court, fines of up to $13,000 for anyone who deliberately coughed, sneezed on an essential worker or any person for that matter.
Today we're looking at clamping down on people who attack frontline workers, and anyone who deliberately coughs, sneezes or spits on frontline workers, including health workers and police, but also people like shop assistants that are in that front line dealing with the community, could be fined up to $1,300 on the spot, or if it goes to court, more than $13,000. Some other states have done this as well, and I think it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk there, and the school debate continues in Queensland. What's the plan for that?
Well, Joe, at this stage, children in Queensland will still be homeschooled. It's up for review on the 15th of May, but the Premier said this morning, independent schools in particular are now calling for potential return, but she took a bit of an aim at them, saying that they were among the first to call for schools to be locked down. So this isn't a clear-cut one, but that will be reviewed on the 15th of May, Joe.
Zillman reporting there from Brisbane. Western Australia has eased restrictions on the number of people who can gather in one place. Reporter James Carmody has more from Cottesloe Beach.
Cottesloe Beach here has been one of the popular places for people to visit during this coronavirus pandemic. But today is the first time they'll be able to come down here and enjoy it with more than one other person. For about a month now, there have been restrictions in place in WA restricting public gatherings to just 2 people unless those persons are people from within your own household. But today, people can now gather in groups of up to 10 people while still maintaining social distancing of 1.5 metres, and police will issue fines if people get too close or if the numbers swell too high. But those restrictions have been eased, along with some other restrictions in Western Australia. From today, you can now attend a home open or a display village. People can also have weddings with up to 10 people. Until now, it was limited to just 5 people, but they've now been brought up to par with funerals with a 10-person maximum. Some of the other restrictions that are still in place in Western Australia are our regional boundaries, restricting travel between 9 regional areas in the state. But within your own region, the advice has been expanded that acceptable reasons for leaving the home now include non-contact recreational activities such as fishing, camping or a picnic in the park. Now, the easing of the gathering restrictions on numbers are aimed at allowing people to better connect with friends and family, which has been difficult for many until this point. It's also thought that relaxing some of these restrictions might encourage the private sector to ease some of their self-imposed measures that they've put in place. It's thought that we may see more people returning to work who have been working from home. In the coming week, trains will be returning to a full timetable in a week's time. And from Wednesday, buses will be running on a full schedule here in Perth. But some businesses will have to wait. Restaurants, cafes are still restricted to takeaway meals only, and pubs, clubs and other venues remain closed for now.
James Carmody reporting there from WA. Health authorities in New South Wales have confirmed just 2 new coronavirus infections in the past 24 hours. Reporter Lara Hyams has more from Sydney.
These 2 cases are actually the best daily cases that have been recorded of coronavirus in the state, actually since March the 8th. So some good measures coming out of the state. We do know as well that the testing that we have been seeing throughout New South Wales has actually increased. So the testing in the last 24 hours is 4,400. And if you compare that to a week ago, we're actually looking at 1,300 tests that took place to test for coronavirus. So it does seem the message of increased testing has been picked up by the community, and in addition to that, the state government has also expanded its criteria and testing availability. We do know that of those 2 cases, 1 person tested positive after they were deemed a return traveller. They were in quarantine in a hotel, and the other case was a person who came into contact with someone who was a known coronavirus case. So out of that, the New South Wales government is still looking to focus on particular hotspots. Obviously, anyone now that is concerned that they may have flu-like symptoms is encouraged to go and get tested. But they're actually focusing on local government areas, and among them in their overview of where they are focusing on, it does include Lithgow, Blue Mountains, Hornsby, Lane Cove, Northern Beaches, and that's in addition to some of the existing hotspots which they have determined. Among those areas, Liverpool, Parramatta, Ryde, Randwick and Waverley. Obviously, those 2 local government areas are where some of the popular beaches in Sydney are. So the total number of cases in Australia is increasing. Tragically, the death toll, though, still stands at 83.
And Lara, what's happening with schools in New South Wales?
Well, the government had always touted that week 3 of term 2 would be when some kind of roster system would be rolled out to allow the resumption of classes. We still don't know exactly how that will shape, how that would look like. We do know that the New South Wales Teachers Federation, though, the union representing teachers, wants that to include mainly Year 12 students first so that they can knuckle down and maximise their time in the education system in the lead up to the HSC, and then they would be looking for an expansion of that. However, the New South Wales State Premier Gladys Berejiklian still hasn't outlined exactly how that would take shape.
I think it's also important to note that neither Queensland or Victoria are having schools go back to face-to-face this term. So the fact that New South Wales, as the largest state, is having students go back to face-to-face teaching is a very big move, and I'm very excited about that, but also I hope that sends a message to the community that we have done well. I deeply appreciate that everybody's respected the restrictions. As difficult as it's been, the vast majority of citizens have done an outstanding job, and this has allowed us to move confidently in getting children back at school.
So for today and tomorrow are actually pupil-free days in the state school system. From Wednesday, the online learning will resume, and as we look to term 3, that roster system still yet to be determined by schools.
Northern Territory parks will reopen in coming days as the government takes a significant step towards easing coronavirus restrictions. The parks will open for activities like fishing and camping from midday on Friday. Reporter Kate Ashton joins us now from Darwin. Kate, g'day. So what are the first restrictions to be relaxed in the Northern Territory?
Yeah, hi Joe. So just like you said, Territorians are very excited to hear that some parks will be open this weekend. Obviously, it's been a bit of a different situation here in the Territory to around the country. So some of them have been open for day use already, but in particular, Darwin residents will look forward to Litchfield National Park being open, not just for day visits, but for camping as well. Unfortunately, still much of the Territory, fortunately, in terms of protecting our remote communities, are still designated biosecurity areas. So in terms of restrictions lifting in the central areas around Alice, less parks will be open there for camping. So it's mainly good news for the top end residents, and especially given that we've got a long weekend coming up here in the NT, so many people will be looking out to get out and about over the weekend. And speaking on local radio this morning, our Chief Minister Michael Gunner hinted that this would be the first announcement of a sort of bigger strategy about how we may ease our restrictions going forward. Here's what he said.
We're aiming towards people in the Territory being able to live the new normal in June. I've got to please go back to that context again about saying, like, we're safe but not immune. And I really want people to understand that second waves of these things are possible. The last thing I'll be touching is the borders.
And so, Kate, every day we look out for these announcements from the states and territories about how many new cases they've reported for the previous day. And again we're seeing that zero figure come up for the Northern Territory. So where to from here?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. So we've been doing very well here in the Territory. Today actually marks 3 weeks since we've reported a new case, and 23 of the 28 cases diagnosed here have now recovered. So if you do the maths, that just means 5 people left have coronavirus in the Territory, and they've had it for about 3 weeks. So hopefully they'll be well on their way to recovery soon. Keeping that in mind, the Chief Minister's announcement this morning about parks, he sort of foreshadowed that on Thursday he expects he'll be outlining a new strategy about how the Territory can return to what he's calling a new normal. And he flagged that the things that we can expect are, pools opening, restaurants and businesses opening in some way, possibly different to what we normally know. And he's expecting that will happen in June. So very exciting news, especially for us in the top end where we're entering the dry season and the nicest weather of the year. So I'm sure everyone will be looking out for what that announcement actually means.
Okay, Kate Ashton reporting there from Darwin in the Northern Territory. More than 1 million people have downloaded the federal government's coronavirus tracing application since it launched yesterday. The smartphone application has been designed to help medical authorities contact people who've come into contact with COVID-19. Let's go to our reporter Dan Conifer in Canberra now. So Dan, how many people were expected to download the app this quickly?
In the realm of the hundreds of thousands, Joe, the government was expecting it would take them 5 days to get to 1 million downloads. Instead, they got there within 5 hours after this app went live and people could register from 6 o'clock Eastern time last night. The government very pleased with this result. It didn't really know what the public's response would be, what the public's view would be towards the privacy of this, or whether the public would trust a government to pull this off. But it looks like plenty of Australians have, and even though at the start of when we started talking about this app being rolled out in Australia, the government was talking about wanting 40% of the population to sign up, around 10 million people or so. It's now not talking about that figure. Possibly because it wants people to go and download it, and for many more millions of Australians to download this app, and don't want that 40% figure to be seen as some kind of cap. The Health Minister, the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, has been speaking about the uptake of the app this morning and was very pleased.
There's no magic number, as both Brendan Murphy and I said yesterday. Any addition is over and above what we'd started from, so it's about assisting our disease experts find people who might have been exposed, and as I say, we're well ahead of our best hopes and expectations already. But the more that are able to do this, as many as possible is our real goal, then that just protects people.
Health Minister Greg Hunt there. Now, Joe, just a reminder about how this works. If people download the app and keep their Bluetooth on, the phone will talk to other phones in close proximity, and if somebody's been near somebody for about 15 minutes, that'll be recorded inside the app. That'll be encrypted. And then if you test positive for coronavirus, you then consent to that store of data, so that log of who you've been in contact with over the past 21 days being uploaded to a central server, and then state and territory health officials contacting those who you have been around so that they can get tested for COVID-19. Now, there have been some privacy concerns. People are still calling for the source code to be released for this app, the source code being what's running in the background, how this has been developed by the app developers, so that the tech experts can see whether there are any vulnerabilities that people need to be told about, and they also want more details about the level of encryption. But the government is assuring people that the info that's on the app and that's sent to the central server will only be used to make contact with people who might have come in contact with a COVID-19 positive person.
And is the government also saying the source code will, or some more of that information will eventually be revealed?
Yeah, it's saying that will likely happen within the next fortnight, but it does want to talk with security agencies first, indicating that while much of the source code might be released, there might be some of it that they hold back, again, just to make sure that the app remains secure.
Okay, now on another story today, Dan, the Chinese ambassador has indicated Australian exports to the country could be at risk, depending on how the government treats Beijing amid the pandemic. Is this a threat from the government?
Well, the Chinese ambassador is saying that sentiment amongst the Chinese people isn't particularly favourable to Australia at the moment, after the Australian government called for an independent international inquiry into this pandemic, including the initial stages of the pandemic, where the virus originated and how Chinese authorities dealt with it initially. Remembering the first major outbreak was in the Hubei province there in China, and the Australian government also raising concerns that the Communist Party of China hasn't been upfront with the world about the way that it's dealt with this and about the virus. So the Chinese ambassador is saying that the people of China aren't particularly pleased with that from the Australian government, and they might stop buying Australian beef, Australian wine and other agricultural products, as well as stop coming to Australia for holidays, or stop sending their children to Australia for tertiary education. It's when it comes from the Chinese government officials saying that this is something their public might do. Well, of course, the public in China is influenced by the state media very heavily, given there is no private or free media in China. It is all government controlled, and the information that the population is getting is information that the Chinese government is allowing it to receive. So some very interesting remarks there from the ambassador this morning. But Penny Wong, Labor's foreign affairs spokeswoman, is backing the the government's call for that independent inquiry and dismissing the concerns raised by the ambassador?
I'd make the point that the Chinese ambassador spoke about not wanting to resort to recrimination, division and suspicion, and what I'd say is that's precisely why we are supporting a call for an independent inquiry into the origin of the virus. I mean, that is precisely the reason why we want to make sure the international community can be assured that we get to the bottom of the origin of the virus.
China should have nothing to fear from an independent inquiry, Penny Wong saying they're in step with the government on this issue, Joe.
OK, Dan Conifer there in Canberra. 181 Australians and New Zealanders who'd been stranded in South America have arrived in Melbourne. A special Qantas flight from Buenos Aires touched down last night. Passengers will now spend 2 weeks in mandatory quarantine in Melbourne hotels. Coronavirus deaths and hospital admissions continue to fall in New York, showing signs the worst of the outbreak there is continuing to slow. Admissions to hospital are now down to levels last seen on March the 31st. The state's Governor Andrew Cuomo has mapped out a staggered lifting of restrictions.
Phase 1 of reopening will involve construction and manufacturing activities. And within construction and manufacturing, those businesses that have a low risk, right? There is a range of construction activities, there's a range of manufacturing activities, but those businesses that pose a low risk within them. Phase 2 would then be more a business by business analysis using the matrix that we've discussed. How essential a service does that business provide? And how risky is that business? If you reopen that business, how much risk are you possibly incurring? And how important is it that that business reopen? And that matrix will be guiding us through phase 2. In phase 2, when we get there, we need businesses to do that analysis. They have to think about how they're going to reopen with this quote-unquote new normal. What precautions are they going to take in the workplace? What safeguards are they going to put in place? So it's very much going to be up to businesses. Then we're going to leave 2 weeks between phases so we can monitor the effect.
Singapore is rapidly preparing hospital beds for coronavirus patients in exhibition halls and other temporary facilities as it faces a surge in cases, mainly among its community of migrant workers. The city-state of 5.7 million people has over 12,000 confirmed infections of the virus, one of the highest infection rates in Asia. Singapore has reported 12 deaths and 24 people are in intensive care. Many labourers living in dormitories are under government-ordered quarantines. Chile will go ahead with a controversial plan to issue certificates that will allow people who've recovered from COVID-19 to return to work. The World Health Organization has warned there's no evidence that recovering from coronavirus gives immunity to the virus. Chile's health ministry disagrees, saying that evidence points to a reduced risk after a first bout of the virus.